Hello and welcome to the 13th ICCE Global Coach Conference in Portugal, Lisbon. Unfortunately, Dr. Rob Mason and I can't be with you in Lisbon as much as we'd like to, but we would like to thank the ICCE for their invitation to present on the impact of a coach developer working in a high performance organization. So let's go. Introducing the people, my name is Ashley Ross. I'm the coach developer who was involved with the South Australian Sports Institute, the high performance organisation, and Dr. Rob Mason was the researcher into the impact of that role. A little bit about me first. I've been largely involved in cricket all my life, involved with the great 1997 Australian women's cricket team that won the World Cup. Had the fortunate experience to be involved with the New Zealand men's cricket team in 2000 when we won the ICC Knockout Trophy in Kenya. I then spent some time in Dubai with the International Cricket Council Academy, and while I was there, went to Japan to do a course on the NCDA, the NSSU Coach Developer Academy, which really opened my eyes as to what true coach development could be about. I returned to South Australia and spent 3 years with the South Australian Sports Institute, a high performance organisation facing with Olympic facing and Commonwealth Games facing sports. So a little bit about that program. So the cohort of coaches I was working with, there was 15 coaches across 9 sports, but most importantly, none of those sports were in cricket. So I really had to start thinking about how I would develop these coaches when I had no background in any of the sports that I worked in. So my focus was on the coaches' interpersonal and intrapersonal skills and knowledge. To put this in a little bit of context, Dr. Wade Gilbert talks really nicely around this notion that there is professional knowledge of your sport, content, X's and O's, but there's also these other areas, this notion of the interpersonal skills about how do we develop relationships, how do we communicate, and importantly, how do we ensure learning has occurred. But there's also the process of the intrapersonal knowledge. How do you make sure that you get better as a coach? How do you control your emotions? How do you get better? Etc., etc. And to ensure that the coaches were getting exposure to enhanced professional knowledge, I made sure that each coach had their own support network, and as part of that network was to have a technical mentor who was looking after their and then stimulating them around their professional knowledge. So let's look a little bit to the process that we followed with each of these coaches. First thing that we did is got all the coaches to fill in a profile. Now, the profile created a great amount of data for us, and that data then informed discussions that we had, some collaborative discussions to build with each of their coaches their bespoke individual coach development plan. And this would basically lay out what they wanted to learn, but would also talk about how they best learned. And I'd take those two considerations and curate for them a learning opportunity that suited both what they wanted to learn and how they wanted to learn it. They would undertake that learning experience. Now, that might have been a course, it may have been a conference, but increasingly with our high performance coaches, it was more around them spending time with other coaches, being in other people's daily training environments, being placed with other programs, and really social learning. But whatever the type of learning that occurred, we took them through a process of guided reflection on that learning to talk about what were the things that reinforced the way you did things already, but also what was the breakthrough learning, the things that you thought would have a significant impact on their coaching behaviours. So post that reflection, when we consolidated that learning, we generated a time-framed action plan to ensure that the behavioural change was embedded in their coaching practice. And I could ensure that because I'd be watching them in situ, in their DTE or potentially in competition. And then, of course, the whole thing would cycle again. But we weren't limited to just these processes. I do a great deal of observations of the coaches in their daily training environment or in competition and provide feedback to them. And often that created a learning experience by which we then introduced into this cycle. We also exposed them to various communities of practice where they could share ideas, what was working, what were challenges, and that was again terrific social learning. But we'd also spend a lot of time with the coaches just dropping in to chat about what was going on in their coaching. things they might like to try, using me as a sounding board, and that was very beneficial for the mutual learning that was occurring as well. So that's a little bit of an insight into the way we did things. What I'll do now is I'll hand over to Dr. Rob Mason, who will talk to you through the method of the research that was undertaken, but also the impact, which is probably the real focus of the presentation. Thanks very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Ash, for the introduction, and thanks, of course, to the ICCE for inviting us and for hosting the conference. Of course, we'd love to be over there in Portugal, but we're coming to you not live but recorded from sunny South Australia. So thank you very much for the invitation to present. In terms of the impact of the coach developer, I was brought on board the project and I was privileged to be a part of it. It was great timing for me as I was just finishing up my PhD studies that were looking at the role of coach feedback and athletes' reception of that feedback. So I was very grateful to come on board and to not just learn about coach development through Ash and my communications with him, but also talking with the coaches who were part of this study. So in terms of the research project itself, I was able to interview 7 coaches who were involved with the South Australian Sports Institute and specifically with the coach developer and his interventions. So those coaches had been coaching in total for around 15 years on average and were involved at the Sports Institute for 4 to 5 years on average. 5 of those coaches were male and 2 were female. Now, as part of this project, I did complete a literature review as well, and you're more than welcome to go and have a look at the full version of the report, which we'll share a link to at the end of this presentation. For the sake of time, I won't go too in-depth with that at the moment, but one of the big things coming out of the literature review was that there are some calls for increasing collaboration between academics and coach development practitioners. Because we don't know enough about coach development from this perspective. So with that in mind and with the small amount of existing research, we went for a fairly exploratory qualitative approach to this research project. So we had a semi-structured interview guide that was centered around the impacts of the coach developer on the coach's practice. We also were interested in benefits and opportunities and general beliefs that the coaches had about coach developer effectiveness. All 7 of these interviews happened over the phone. Unfortunately, as the project kicked off, it was right in the thick of our first COVID lockdown in South Australia. So a little bit of background on these coaches. In terms of the 7, all 7 had engaged with formal learning in the past. Now that might be a university degree, or it might be formal coach accreditation, level 1, level 2, level 3, and so on. Coaches who had previously worked with a coach developer, 0 out of 7. So this was each coach's first experience in working with a coach developer, which was really interesting. And of those 7 coaches, 5 of them had a sport-specific mentor from a tactical and technical perspective. So more than half of them had had experience with some type of mentor, just not the more general services that a coach developer might provide. Straight into the good stuff. What did the coaches report as the benefits of working with the coach developer? So the most common response here was around challenging the coach's thinking or their existing assumptions about what good coaching looks like. So a few of those quotes that came through from the coaches were, "It got me out of my comfort zone." Another benefit was challenging the status quo of what we would normally do as coaches. And a third coach reported, "You really gain a lot just from questioning your own methodologies." So this idea around having someone to lean on as a critical friend or a sounding board, as Ash mentioned, was the most commonly reported benefit of working alongside the coach developer. So challenging the coach's thinking. And tied in with that, Ash mentioned some of the more informal catch-ups that he had with the coaches. One of the benefits that kind of fell into this scenario as well was a coach mentioned, and I quote, "thrashing coaching ideas around on a whiteboard." So this notion of being able to critically think about their approach to coaching and do this in combination with the coach developer was seen as a benefit. So just a really quick summary of some of the other benefits and also some opportunities to improve. Regular feedback on coaching was another really commonly reported benefit from the coaches. So plenty of the coaches referred to the coach developer's influence on their thinking around athlete autonomy, athlete-centered coaching, and moving away from a highly prescriptive coaching style. And some of the coaches said it had been a massive change for the way that they thought about their coaching. Another benefit was around the confidence that the coaches got in their own coaching approach. So the coach developer didn't just challenge the coach's beliefs and their approaches 100% of the time. There were moments there where the coach developer did a really great job at reinforcing what the coach already did that was really good. Coaches said things like, it's mostly just confidence and belief, to be honest. Sometimes you don't know you're doing something, and when someone brings it to your attention, it helps you to reflect in a positive way. Another reported benefit was the regular, individualized and responsive professional development that the coach developer could offer, and a little bit more on that on the next slide. Opportunities to improve. Some of the coaches mentioned seeing value in learning from outside their immediate area of expertise. So hearing some more from other sports or from other fields entirely outside of sport was something that the coaches wanted to see more of in the future. And they cited a few examples of where the coach developer had provided an external speaker to come in and provide some of this development. They thought that was great. Another coach of what they described as a physiology-heavy sport mentioned that his sport was really heavily physical, and they are trying to make some small technical changes as part of their training, but it might not be something that the coach discusses until the end of the session or later on in the piece. So for the coach developer who had a largely a background in sports that weren't deemed to be, I quote, physiology heavy, so more kind of tactical sports such as cricket, this was seen as a barrier for this particular coach. And there was also a bit of thinking around just wanting some direct feedback at times. So the coach that mentioned this articulated that, of course, it's important for the coach developer not to just prescribe a correct way to coach, but at times expressed a desire to receive a bit more direct and certain feedback. So again, that was a minority of the voices in this study. Some interesting thoughts around the distinctions between formal learning and coach development. So all 7 of the coaches agreed that working alongside the coach developer added to their growth as a professional. And 5 of the 7 preferred the coach developer's services over more formal sources of learning. And another 2 thought that there was room for both. So here are a couple of quotes just to illustrate that. Having someone in your environment is crucial to see how you operate day to day with your athlete group in your own comfort zone. That's where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. And I think courses play their part, but having a more personalized, consistent and ongoing approach to it is going to bring about more habitual change, compared to just walking out of a conference all excited, but a week later, most of it washes out. And this ties into the ICCE's 2019 report, The Development of Current and Future High Performance Coaches. So among the conclusions of that report was the idea that personalized interventions that happen within the coach's context are the most effective for positively modifying coach practice. So some similarities in the findings between these 2 reports. To conclude, given the overwhelmingly positive evidence in both the literature review and the data collection interviews, investing in the services of a coach developer is likely to be the most effective way a high-performance sporting organisation can develop coaches. And importantly, it's also a method preferred by high-performance coaches. Thank you again for having us. Both of our contact details are on this final slide, and you'll also see a QR code that you can use to access Ash's LinkedIn page. And on that page, you'll find a version of the report that you can download to find further information. Thank you.